Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new episode of Skylanders Imaginators Versus here on the channel. Today's episode is going to be kicked off right in the cutscene where the previous episode obviously came to an end. This is as opposed to the summoning in animations for each of these characters. Makes things kicked off to a very fair start here. You can tell that already the villains and the senseis are neck and neck. The senseis repping legendary tri-tip whilst the villains have Blastatron, because the first elemental area of FIZZLAND would be the light element, it turns out. Regardless, whilst both of these teams are going through and defeating the guacamole monster, it gives me the opportunity to reveal these awards that are going to be given out at the end of the series. So the first two awards are ones which are statistical, so you can't actually vote for them because they're based on the accomplishments of each team in the series. The first of which is going to be called the Comeback King, which is about the character that managed to save the most time for their respective teams. So whenever one team was behind, if a particular character managed to come in and effectively nullify that loss for their respective team, then they are most likely going to be the winners of the Comeback Award. So it is literally just whichever member of the respective team was able to come back when compared to the losses they were at going against the other team. Comeback King, very simple and self-explanatory, which brings us on to the next statistical based award, known as the Collectionist. This award is going to be given to whichever character collects the most chests. Now this isn't an award that's given out to which sensei collected the most or which villain collected the most. It is given to which character collected the most, period. It doesn't matter which team they're on, there is only one of each of these awards to be won, and you will go to whichever character deserves them. It could be two senseis that earn these awards, or it could be two villains. We'll find out later in the series when we actually have all of these statistics to analyse and give out achievements for. Now that's basically it for the statistical awards, and speaking of that being just about it, already the villains are down to the head of the guacamole monster. You could even say that they are ahead of the competition. Yeah, I'm definitely not apologising for that pun right there. But regardless, we're going to move on to the award ceremonies that are going to be voted on by you, the viewers. We have 5 of them. First of all, is going to be for MVP for either team. So there's going to be a Sensei MVP and a Villain MVP. Obviously, this means that you guys at the end of the 11th episode is when these votes are going to be opened for you all, and you get to vote on which sensei you think was for MVP for their respective team and which villain do you think was for MVP of their respective team. Then the final 3 awards, again, these are going to be voted upon, and the votes are going to open up for the 11th episode, where we're going to take a 1-week break between the 11th episode and the finale in order to give enough time for these awards to be voted upon. So naturally, the last of these 3 awards is the best moment, so you get to vote on which was the best moment of the entirety of this series. So if there's a particular moment you enjoy throughout the runtime of this series, maybe it's even from this episode, be sure to keep note of it so that then you can vote for it in the future of this series and ensure that the true best moment of the series is for one winning this award. But that being said, the next 2 awards, one is for the best designed character, so it doesn't matter which team they're from. It could be a sensei that wins this or a villain that wins this, but the votes are for the best designed character. This is purely so I can gauge a more audience-based opinion on which of these 20 designs is the best ones. And that leads us on to the next category, the best level. Now this does exclude adventure pack levels and realms, and speaking of realms, both of these teams are actually discovering the dark realm because that's going to be beneficial for their timers later on when we go to collect all of the cake pieces. With that being said, they're both making their way to FIZZLAND slowly but surely, where we're going to have more loading screens and more cutscenes to skip, aka obviously the best part behind this series. So that being said, when it comes to the best level, obviously viewers are left to vote for which is the best level of the main game, the best level which has effectively been played in this Versus series. I want to see from an audience perspective what the best level in this game is, and since you guys will be voting on that award, I will be able to get first-hand data for what all of you think is the best Imaginators level from the main game, and the same can be said for the best designed character, which again only goes to one character from one team or the other. And the villains are in and straight back out again, because it will turn out in this light section, which is why we incorporated light characters into the beginning of this episode in the first place. But this light section is only good for one thing, which is treasure and a selfie spot. Obviously you don't need that, so the quickest way is just to get into the area and get straight back out of it, something the villains did, but the senseis didn't do, purely because they were inexperienced going through this level. The senseis had to go through it the first time around, it was their turn, and so because of that lack of experience and foresight, the senseis, whilst they're going through and completing this puzzle in full, the villains have just popped in, got the area counter and popped back out again. Because with FIZZLAND, in this level, to get the final star, all you need to do is find every area and make sure none of your characters are defeated, because obviously the only way of losing that objective is to have a life having been lost. There is no speedrun objective in this level, for lack of a better way of putting it. So in other words, as long as these characters find all of the areas, they can get that final star. And the villains just went in, they initiated the area having been found for that final objective and got straight back out again. And with that, they're already much further ahead than the senseis, who are only just switching out for their Earth companion or compadre, however you want to put it, all of the C words all combined together. Here we have Barbella, obviously traversing for the real world, which is even more bizarre than this world somehow. And they have a puzzle to complete, of which the villains have already popped in for the troll radio in the dark area. So yes, for Sensei's lack of experience and having to go through this for the first time is really what is causing them a huge time deficit. So let's just say Legendary Tri-Tip is so far getting the opposite of the Comeback King award, and they are at least pretty quick on the combination in order to earn the chest for the vault. And speaking of that vault, come the end of this episode, the Imaginite chest collected by either team is going to be evened out, because the senseis are going to be able to access the Swashbuckler Shrine to get that Imaginite chest. And in the previous level, they were also able to complete the Collectionist Star, where the villains were not, because the villains missed out on Blastatron's Soul Gem. They went through first, and so naturally I didn't have that on my mind when I was playing through the villain run-through of the level. That was a mistake I corrected for the senseis. Just like here, where the senseis are making mistakes that I'm corrected upon for the villains, that's just for benefit of going second as opposed to going first, which is why I alternate each time which team goes first and which team goes second. But yeah, that basically means that the two Imaginite chest deficit that the senseis had have now been nullified by both that Collectionist Star in Sky Fortress, as well as the Swashbuckler Shrine they will be accessing in this particular episode. Now they finally made it to the dark section, where Starcast can, first of all, make his way up to the treasure chest in the top right hand corner. Then he's going to complete the troll radio, and then he's going to head back out to where Chomper Mage is already a decent chunk of the way through the life section. And unlike most of the other villains, Chomper Mage does have a speeding up ability, so he can dash forward and gain a couple of seconds here and there. But even when we swap out for the undead villain, there's still going to be a massive speed advantage for the villains, given that Wolfgang has his own dashing ability. So we're back to Ambush for the senseis here, and after Ambush is said and done with all of this, he still needs to worry about collecting Flarewolf Soul Gem, because otherwise they will fail the Collectionist Star, and that's the last thing they need, because then they're going to lose that Imaginite chest, and they're going to effectively lose their advantage over the villains when it comes to the Imaginite chest being collected. And obviously all of these characters want to collect as many chests as possible now that the award for the Collectionist has been revealed. We have 7 awards to look forward to for the finale of this series, 5 of which are being voted upon, and it was my pleasure today to announce those awards. But like I said earlier, we're not going to be voted on those awards just yet, because the votes are going to open up on the 11th episode, where we're going to take a 1-week break and then return to the finale 2 weeks later to find out who has won those prestigious awards. Now obviously the villains have completed their egg rescue mission thing with Bob. It's all one big mouthful for me at the moment. And you'll also notice that they are back to the standard they were at before, because we've gone back to their main profile after having had to record Sky Fortress in a different profile due to recording issues on their behalf. But here go the villains once again, with Wolfgang absolutely obliterating those enemies, no surprise. Ambush has switched back to the correct world, so then he can push things into place, whilst Pop Fizz speaks, obviously, for Sensei's going to switch out the Pit Boss, and then they're going to have the Egg Rescue arcade minigame, which is going to be the exact same level this time around, so there's going to be no disadvantage in terms of which Egg Rescue minigame is easier or whatnot. But given that the fact that the villains now have a 5-second lead, that huge difference in the timers is going to prove that all of these few frame losses, all of these few frame saves, in the end, is probably not going to amount to anything. The team that wins the speedrunning challenge probably was a team that was going to win it regardless. And that's not to say the Senseis are entirely out of it, because it could be just about anybody's game still. And the villains are still at a deficit when it comes to their cast, because they lost Bad Juju. And speaking of losing things, apparently Pit Boss lost all sense of platforming skill right there. But the villains lost Bad Juju, whereas the Senseis even, they still have a full cast. They are looking alright for themselves. Pit Boss not being nearly as effective on the Egg Rescue minigame as Wolfgang was, though. Again, this is a disadvantage of them having to go first. So it would appear that Pit Boss is both a platform failure and an Egg Rescue arcade game in failure. Luckily for us, Pit Boss is a failure in no other categories, given how broken he gets. He's going to explore this area quickly, not even realising that the chest was only there right-hand corner, something that Wolfgang went straight towards, because again, he had that hindsight, having watched the Senseis play out the level before him. Only just now as Pit Boss entering the area, as Wolfgang sends away the globules. It's so annoying having to deal with those. It's a filler part to the mission, which really does drag the pacing of the level down. But this isn't a critique on FIZZLAND, no, this is the 6th episode of the Skylanders Versus series, something which I have no idea what to call it as of just now. So who knows, the title might come from my critiques of this level. And worst of all, its biggest offence is the lack of creativity when it comes to the gameplay mechanic, because we have the world switching gimmick, which has been done in Skylanders before, and it doesn't add anything new to that gimmick. It just kind of explores it in the same simple nature as Dark Light Crypt and Willikin Village did, but this one is a lot more slow paced, so it basically suffers for its lack of creativity when compared to other levels preceding it that did a much better job with its mechanic in the first place. So it's a knockoff level with no creativity and slow pacing. Luckily for us, Wolfgang isn't quite so slow paced, so already he has destroyed some trees and is heading towards some enemies where there's a swashbuckler shrine, which is not even worth switching out for, because, well, we can't have that choice granted to us, given that Bad Juju was defeated in battle and is now classed as dead and cannot be used again throughout the remainder of the series. The Senseis have to hope that the villains fail for Creation Clash game at this point, because they are so far behind. Only just now is Pit Boss picking up the globules, and he has a very different approach to Wolfgang, whereas he's trying to pick up specific globules and then switch between worlds as he's doing so. Wolfgang instead just picked up all of the ones of one certain colour and then switched to the other colour along the way. All of this world shifting is potentially losing precious time for the villains, but again it goes back to the fact that all of these minimal time stays, all of these minimal time losses, it's probably not going to amount to much in the end, but if it does, we're going to have something fun to analyse in the finale, so either way it's a win-win situation. Now, the villains are obviously done with the Creation Clash game, the Skystones game. Wait, no, got it right the first time, it is in fact the Creation Clash game. Wolfgang has to be so careful here though, because those projectiles hone in on you. You saw from that bottle enemy there, no matter how much Wolfgang maneuvered in this tiny ass arena, there was no chance of him escaping that projectile. But luckily he escaped with his life, very important, because the villains really do not need another defeat. We need to get Wolfgang through as much of the game as possible so that then he can obliterate that Bowslinger Doomlander in the Dragon Temple level. He's going to collect that experience because that's going to level him up, and he's going to have his health fully restored as a result. That was some good strategy on behalf of the villains. But now Pit Boss is going to have to push these blocks into place, and he's choosing to take things a lot more slowly than the villains, obviously, for Sensei to go through this for the first time, so they aren't as well equipped to deal with the level. It's not as familiar in my head for them as it was playing through for the villains. And speaking of the villains, they've already completed the Locke puzzle, so Wolfgang is obviously going to have that gremlin placed into the place where it needs to be. Pit Boss is, whilst he's in the correct world, going to push that bottle up to the trees, and then he's going to make his way up for the treasure. When I was playing through this as the villains, I thought, or as the Senseis even, I thought there was a treasure chest here, or at the bottom left, so I checked them both. There was no treasure chest in either, which is why Wolfgang in advance knew already to not go out of the way and lose any of the time. Unlike Pit Boss did, he's lost the time already, not knowing that there was nothing to gain from his little expedition. So Pit Boss is quickly going to take down his enemies, and then he's going to actually deal with a Creation Clash before switching out for Chain Reaction. I'm pretty sure this is because when I was playing as the Senseis, Chain Reaction was not on my desk, so I needed to pick him up from my shelf, and I knew for a fact that during the downtime in the Creation Clash game, that I would be able to quickly leg over to my shelf and grab the figurine that I needed, so that's why we did the Creation Clash game first. And here is Pinata being very efficient with this puzzle, because it would appear that the only block you need is the closest most block to the second platform in order to actually be able to jump onto it. It's a bit like the bookshelves in the academy level before Shelmont Shores, where all you need to do is push the closest most block in order to gain access to the higher up level. The Senseis are going to be successful at the Creation Clash game, not quite as much of a win as the villains that beat the enemy known as FIZZLAND. They beat him 6-3 rather than 5-4 without a Pit Boss system. With that, he's actually going to complete this section very, very carefully. Watch out for those projectiles. And Pinata for the villains, it's time to acknowledge this. He finally has had his debut, and he is going to get to be a beast here, because rather than switching out for water, that would be a waste of everyone's time. We decided to stick it out, and now the element of the area is actually the Sensei element, so we remain as the character we was playing as at the moment, and that was Pinata due to the magic element being stronger in the extra zone, which you had to go through in full based on the collectibles that were found there, and obviously we need those collectibles for those level stars. Pit Boss is going to get that treasure for no good reason whatsoever, but now he's going to complete the puzzle and then head back for the Swashbuckler Shrine. But there goes Pinata, absolutely unleashing hell upon these enemies. It's a shame he has taken so long to debut, because his gameplay is so much fun. You can see that from the absolute chaos going on the screen right now, but the Senseis have already completed the puzzle. Now they just need to actually make it out of here, and as you can tell, they are struggling much more so than the villains did, not having that hindsight, not knowing the quickest route immediately, unlike the villains did, because the villains had the benefit of going directly after the Senseis when I was more familiar with the level for the second time around. But this all means that Pinata will get to do the Battle Gong for the villains, whilst Buckshot gets to do the Battle Gong for Senseis, as magic will obviously pop up for them as well when they go for the collectible. But they aren't nearly close to that same level as Pinata is, because only just now do they have the honour of switching out of a Chain Reaction to access that Swashbuckler Shrine. In fact, he's going to be so hasty in mashing the skip button that he's going to even initiate his tertiary attack, and trying to take that route around the little bottle right there really did not work out in Chain Reaction's favour. In fact, switching out of a Tide Pool probably would be quicker than walking over to the area with Chain Reaction, because his walking speed is so darn slow. But, wow, we've hit that 2-hour mark for the Senseis and the villains alike. Man, time does go fast when you're having fun, though I must admit this level wasn't nearly as fun as Sky Fortress. But here goes Pinata, slowly but surely taking down that enemy, and also mashing the primary attack button so heavily that he immediately enters into the Battle Gong. It's time to obliterate everything in sight. That's what he has his little pinatas for, to create explosions, to daze and confuse enemies. That is the name of a good film right there. Either way, Buckshot, let's see if he's going to be wise enough to use the same tactic as Pinata. So he is going to move 2 of the blocks into the correct path, but the final block he is going to keep where it is, because it's going to be very hilarious to see that final block suspended in midair, because no matter in which order you push these blocks, that final block is always suspended in midair. I suppose the developers assumed that you would push the bottom block into the correct place the first time around, and even if you didn't, they needed that block to be there, otherwise you'd be soft lock and be unable to get the Ninja Imaginator Soul Gem, because you wouldn't have that second block available to you. But Imaginators was so soft when it came to soft locking you out of collectibles, because in other games, in previous Skylanders games, you would have been soft locked out of that collectible and you would have to come back for it. The example there being Giants, because obviously you needed in the Malkin Mountain level to take a block from the higher level. Oh man, Buckshot is failing this platformer again, and Buckshot is not a particularly skilled platformer. In fact, what you're about to see from his gameplay is going to prove that he's not a particularly skilled Bowslinger either. Buckshot just kind of sucks, with the exception of his design. His design is phenomenal, but that's the only thing Buckshot has going for him. Because seriously, look at that gameplay. It's slow and not very powerful. When you compare Buckshot to Pinata, who is now already at the globule sorting section, it's clear that Pinata was the superior character through and through. So even if the Senseis were ahead, even if the Senseis didn't botch at the beginning of this level by going through that entire unnecessary section for the sake of nothing but treasure, even without that disadvantage, the Senseis would be losing any sort of time advantage they had before now. Given how much of a failure Buckshot is at defeating these enemies quickly, he has to take his time and take things slow because the Senseis don't want him being defeated because they don't want to lose their cast advantage at the moment. Meanwhile, Pinata is almost done with sorting out the globules and Buckshot isn't even at the Battle Gong yet. Pretty sure he was talking about something before. I went on this mad tangent about how bad Buckshot was, but since I've completely forgot about the topic I was talking about, it clearly wasn't that important a topic in the first place. But now, obviously, Pinata has finally finished with the globules. It's about damn time. Man, does this level get slow paced. I cannot seem to stop belly aching about FIZZLAND in the FIZZLAND level, in the FIZZLAND episode, I should say. Funny how I bellyache about FIZZLAND in the same episode where I've announced that there's going to be an award given to the best level in this game. I wonder what the last level would be that I would personally give that award. But you know what, my opinion doesn't matter because that is going to be a viewer-based vote for which level is the best level in Imaginators. Now, Buckshot does have one ability that can pull enemies away from him, very useful when he does want to get hit, and it's even more useful that that enemy gone on ahead and committed Sudoku in the middle of the stage there. Very useful, that indeed. There's also one thing useful about Bad Juju's death is that this air section is about to come up for the villains after Dr. Crankcase needlessly fights those enemies, mind you. Here, the air element pops up, but the villains have no one to switch to because Bad Juju is dead. So that lack of swapping animation is giving them a slight advantage there. In fact, because they didn't have to switch out for Swashbuckler Shrine either, that means that there are far less switch outs for the villains to have to have worried about in this episode, which seems to be a common occurrence for the villains. No wonder why they're several minutes ahead. They've had far less summons than the Senseis to deal with. Now, Buckshot is once again really taking his time with this enemy, because he sucks at fighting them, no other reason. But finally he's down and Buckshot can tackle the Battle Gong. But Tycoon Crow, in the meanwhile, is going to have the Night, not even the Night, the Ninja Doomlander to deal with. Luckily, though, that's what we have the Big Bird for. Tycoon Crow's Soldier really coming in clutch here, but he did take some damage, and we've got to be very careful with Tycoon Crow because one hit is pretty much death with his health bar, or shall I say, the lack thereof when it comes to his health bar. 600 health for a Sensei at level 20 is minimal at best, and so that's the only bad thing about Tycoon Crow, for lack of a health bar he possesses. Buckshot doesn't have a particularly good health bar either, so the fact that they made him weaker and gave him less health is not a good offset balance whatsoever. And already Buckshot is down at 62, so we're going to have to see if he can clutch out this section, because if he would, that would be legendary, and it would be a good, it would be a step in the right direction for his MVP honours that you could potentially vote him for. But here he goes, defeating his enemies slowly but surely, the key word here being on slow. Meanwhile, Tycoon Crow is already at the final phase of the Ninja Doomlander boss fight. Boy, is he absolutely obliterating this guy. Though he's at 287 health, which normally wouldn't be a problem, but that is literally more than half of Tycoon Crow's health bar. So here he goes with more of his Fire Ninja Stars. And Buckshot is almost making way to the end of Battle Gong here, whilst Tycoon Crow already has defeated Doomlander. Yeah, the Sensei's taking this one from the back. That is an understatement. They are all the way in the back. They have the entire field to get through in 3 laps. And that, my friends, is my Cars 3 reference of the day. I have no idea why I reference Cars so much in this series, but here we are. This might as well be known as a Cars subsidiary, or however the word goes. Point is, the subgenre of this series is Cars. Who even knew Cars could be its own subgenre? But here we are with me rambling on. And I'm not the only one. Pop Fizz is also rambling on. And Tycoon Crow, he doesn't really seem to be all that fussed by it. It's party time for the villains as they get to relish in their victory over the Senseis this episode, because boy, did they absolutely obliterate them. They got through the level way quicker, and they haven't even came close to death yet. Buckshot at 62 health, but the main thing is that it doesn't matter if Buckshot had 1,000 health or 1 piece of health. Having health still means that your Skylander is not defeated whatsoever, and it means Buckshot gets to live on for another day, and the Sensei cast gets to remain at 10 players. Wow, that was one hell of a clutch from Buckshot. When I was playing through it, I honestly thought that this was going to be the end of Buckshot, and after having wasted time that I knew the villains were going to make up for, I felt as though this was going to be a massive failure on the Sensei's behalf. But it would appear as though the Senseis could have had it worse. They could have lost Buckshot, but he clutched it out in the end. So I suppose that does pay Buckshot well in anticipation for the MVP award of the Senseis. Now the villains are just absolutely blazing it through with their respective villain vault. Their chests collected at the end of this is going to be enormous, nearing that of the 100 marker actually. So it's going to be interesting to see how many chests each team have collected at the very end of this. And I'm going to be extremely disappointed if it's the exact same number for one. Buckshot is going back to make sure he didn't accidentally miss any of the Imaginite chests, but he seems to have been successful on his job, whereas now we get to switch back to Chain Reaction, who only got merely but a cameo previously, because the tech element is stronger here. Boy, do I wish the tech element was stronger down there in the little combat section, so then we could have switched from Buckshot back to Chain Reaction again, because Chain Reaction, whilst not being the greatest gameplay-wise, he is still better than Buckshot's gameplay. But saying that a character has better gameplay than Buckshot isn't really saying much. It's a very low bar to surpass. And the Senseis are making the same mistake as the villains here. The villains, whom have already finished, by the way, 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 10 seconds is where their timer is concluding in this episode. Meanwhile, the Senseis now have to switch out for Airstrike after Chain Reaction needlessly defeated those enemies. He didn't need to do that, yet he gone out of his way to do it anyway. That was one of those mistakes that I made that I didn't correct upon when I did the villains playthrough second. So the fact that I didn't learn from that mistake was the biggest mistake of it all. There goes Airstrike bouncing on the drums. I have no idea why they use drums as bounce pads in this part of the level, but you know what? Developers are going to be developers, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. It's as they say, a developer's going to do what a developer's going to do. So here comes Starcast to finish off the level for the Senseis, as he is the Ninja Sensei, and this is the Ninja Doomlander. Ninja Senseis fight Ninja Doomlanders, it's simple as that. And luckily for Starcast, he has a very particularly helpful move with his tertiary, where he can turn invisible, create a shadow clone, and then that shadow clone deals damage of its own. And it helps these projectiles are dealing a lot of very quick damage. The projectiles also hone back into the enemy, where already Starcast is on the second phase. I give Starcast a lot of slack, but it would appear that he's more effective at fighting this Doomlander than what Tycoon Crow is. That is a statement that I never thought I would say, and yet here we are. If Starcast gets through this unscathed, then he is going to be in this series for the long haul, because the Dark Element doesn't really appear very much in the game after this point. I believe it does have a pretty big prevalence in Chaos's lair, but outside of that, I don't think it appears in any of the other levels, and if it does, it's minimal at best, especially since Golden Arcade, the level we're doing next episode, has very little switch outs to worry about, period. There is the tech element, there is the light element, and then there is the Smash Doomlander, and that is it. So if the Senseis are successful, it means that they get to switch out for Legendary Tri-Tip, also the Smasher for the Sensei class, during the light segment. So Senseis are only going to have 2 representatives next episode if they play their cards right. You have to wait and see how that turns out, but for now, Starcast is already on this final phase of Ninja Doomlander. The fact that he turns invisible makes it so this Doomlander fool isn't even attacking him half of the time, and that's very efficient in terms of dealing damage to the Doomlander without being damaged himself. And just like that, Starcast has finished the fight. So we got to sit through all these cutscenes all over again and get to the villain vault so that these Senseis can finally stop their timer. They're already 3 minutes behind, and they have another 2 minutes to worry about with cutscenes and loading screens. You know, the best part of the game, because everyone knows that when you buy a video game, who actually wants to play the video game, right? You'd way rather just sit around watching loading screens and watching cutscenes all day. It's not like that's what you have films and television shows for. Nah, why would you watch stuff in a game instead when you can, well, why would you play stuff when you can watch stuff instead? I have a video game. I don't even want to play my video game. I want to instead watch my video game. I say that whilst being a huge fan of Telltale games, and those games are known for their television-like structure. At the end of the day, they release in episodes, and they have very little interaction. You make choices as the cinematics play out before you. So as a fan of Telltale games, I really cannot bellyache too much about not being able to play the video game. But still though, Imaginators on PlayStation 4 is an expensive video game. I would like to play my video game now. And luckily, all of these cutscenes are finally over. I can finally get back to actually playing the video game. So Starcast here, he's got to kind of carefully sift through these Imaginite chests to make sure he doesn't accidentally open up any of the villains' chests, because unfortunately chests carry over between profiles, and given that the villains were recorded second, I needed those chests left behind for when the villains came through and opened them up from their respective villain vault. Here for Sensei are completing the set, the last thing they need, because that's going to be a bigger waste of time. But after we carefully sifted through them, that first treasure chest obviously came from the Creation Clash game, and these are treasure chests coming from Sky Fortress as well as the level they just beat, which is why the Creation Clash was the kicking off chest in this vault, because the Creation Clash game was the first thing the Senseis completed during their run through of the Sky Fortress level. Now we're slowly but surely making our way to the end. We just got to continue mashing that X button until we get to the end where we have the Queen Torso. Here comes another one. Now, the next episode, we get to beat Baron von Shellshock at Creation Clash. In fact, we get to beat a bunch of people at Creation Clash. A bunch of people who are not very good at Creation Clash, mind you, including one called a Loose Cannon, the same name as a Transformers Prime episode, funny enough. But we're preparing to wind things down now. There's only 2 more chests left for the Senseis, which means that their timer is going to stop 5 minutes after the villains. They have a lot of work to do to catch up on all that lost time. But that being said and done, this episode has finally come to an end. I cannot, in good conscience, end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!